Welcome everyone to this webinar from the Open Group. Today's event is being brought to us by Corso, which is a very active member of the Open Group, and I'm today as Martin Owen, CEO of Corso. Before I hand over to Martin, let me just go over a few housekeeping issues to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, we would encourage you to ask questions, and there's the best way to ask questions is to submit them via the text QA facility. If you do write a question into that, please can I ask you to address it to all participants, way everyone gets to see all the questions that are being submitted. Martin and myself will try and answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. This event is also being recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical difficulties, then a full recording of this event will be available from tomorrow. And everyone who's registered for today's event will get an email which will contain a link to that recording. I've already a few inquiries with regards to Martin's slide deck. I'm sure Martin probably will be making his slide deck available, and I'm sure he'll confirm that through his presentation. So, Mark, if you're ready, can I ask you to make a move?
Sure, yeah, so thank you, Simon. And the first point is, obviously, yes, the slide deck will be made available. And you can also, if you contact us at corso3.com, then we'll send the slide deck out to you. I'll give you a URL at the end of the presentation. So to begin with, thank you for taking the time out to join this presentation. I'm spending about 45 minutes taking you through road mapping with ArchiMate and TOGAF, history about Corso, first of all. A fairly new organisation. We were created in 2011. We have a worldwide presence, so we have offices in the US, Canada, UK and Australia. And obviously, as you can tell from my accent, I'm from the UK. We created the company to look at how we can address gaps with additional enterprise architecture environments. Also at strategic planning, which is really around how do we make enterprise architecture accessible to a wider community, a wider audience of people. And how do we plug into things like portfolio management and also further down the delivery life cycle. As a company, we have many years of enterprise architecture and strategic planning experience. My past was actually running the product management team for enterprise architecture at IBM. So IBM for several years prior to 2011. And then to that I was with an organisation called Telelogic. I'm president of enterprise architecture, and then to that I was with a company called Hopkins Software. We're also in enterprise architecture. I've been in enterprise architecture for a long time. Core actually IBM partners, so we do resell products from IBM, particularly around enterprise architecture and planning. We cloud and SaaS offering, so you can rent products from us on a monthly basis, including IBM products. And obviously we provide consulting and training services, and we're also certified in TOGAF and ArchiMate. So that's a little bit about Corso. What we've been over the past years, we've been working with a number of large and small companies in the UK, US and Australia. And what we're seeing is a large percentage of those customers are starting to use roadmaps to have conversations with their executives, but also to start to drive value out of enterprise architecture. Now, roadmaps take a number of forms. So strategic roadmaps, which really get presented to the executives in the organisation, they really state the strategic intent and the direction of the organisation. There are object and work package roadmaps, and we'll look at what they are later in the presentation. What we call life cycle roadmaps, which tell us the life cycle or the state of things over time. And then we've got technology, application roadmaps, and many other types of roadmaps. What I'm going to focus on here are looking at two different types, business and architectural roadmaps. ArchiMate, both to be enhanced to support full road mapping. So out of the box, with ArchiMate, you don't have all of the attributes and all of the concepts available to generate what I would call a full roadmap. Now, as Corso, obviously we're working with the Open Group, working on both ArchiMate and TOGAF. Other things that you're seeing and will be discussed today are actually being discussed internally within the open group for future versions. Okay, so the agenda for today is I'm going to give you a little overview on enterprise architecture and the strategic planning lifecycle and what that means. We're going to look at important concepts around road mapping, including what are the industry standards and how do they affect it. We'll then look at the core capabilities in terms of individual roadmaps, and then look at the meta model and how we've amended the meta model, and then look at lessons learned. And these are that we've learned over a period of time from our customer base. So I find this informative and interesting as we move through. Okay, so architecture and strategic planning life cycle. What you'll see on the right-hand side there is the TOGAF ADM. So really the method or the process that you move through, or the life cycle for supporting enterprise architecture initiatives. But it's a bit broader than that. So you'll see right at the heart of it in the middle is requirements management. But around the side, I've highlighted there some different iterations that you can move through when planning out your architectures. So you'll see at the top there we've got what we call the architectural context iteration, which is why we're doing the architecture in the first place. And we iterate through that a number of times. We've also architecture definition iteration. So this is where we traditionally do things like our business architectures, our information systems architectures. We look at technology and data, opportunities and solutions of how we're going to implement change, and then we look at migration planning. Transition in its own right. But I've also cited there what we call transition planning. We're really looking at how do we look at as is versus who be or target architectures. And that's looking at opportunities for change, section or bubble E. And F is really what is the migration plan? What are the resources, the roles, people, the skills that we need to get from one place to the next, and what are the architectural differences required to enable us to get there? And then we've got some other iterations which go on. So around the governance of the architecture, and they include things like looking after the implementation, governing that, and then govern the change management. So you can see on the go is there are lots of different life cycles that are interconnected. They're all part of the strategic planning picture, and that's been laid out in TOGAF previously. So there's techniques involved in this. So it's just a modelling exercise where we capture business processes, the strategy, the business capabilities, roadmaps, etc. It's also about documentation and reporting, but also delivering things of value to the organisation, and that's really what we're going to concentrate on. So we'll look at change in the context of enterprise architecture. It's much slower than things like traditional software development life cycles, which are really downstream. So it tends to be slower. It tends to need high approval cycle, so other governance around it, and it includes multiple plans and programs and things like options and option analysis. So it's very different when we look at change within strategic planning and enterprise architecture than it is when we look at things like software development. The main output from what we do inside our enterprise architecture is a list of recommendations for change, so what things do we want to change and what things make sense to change, and the constraints. And those are like resource constraints, technology constraints. And those are the outputs of our blueprints. And we use those to decide how we're going to transition between different blueprints or different architectural perspectives. And to do this, we use timelines and roadmaps. And those are a really good way, a good view of a snapshot of our architecture over time. Okay, what are the important concepts for road mapping? Look on the left-hand side here. We're talking about workspaces and plateaus. Now, plateaus are actually a very similar thing, and plateaus came into play in ArchiMate. So they're ArchiMate concepts. So what we've done here as part of road mapping here is brought in concepts from other places, from other standards where it makes sense. See that throughout the presentation. So those allow us to dip our architecture in different working groups of information. A plateau could be something like an architecture as it currently is. We could have a target architecture for 2014. We could have this architecture for a particular business division for 2015. And those will be different plateaus. We talk about gaps. And really the difference between two plateaus. So we have to know how to get from one plateau to another. We start to look at which gaps we need to fill. And along the way there, we produce work packages, and these are the packages of work that we need to produce, which contain deliverables. And then we have stones, and mine are the achievable targets, attainable targets that we want to deliver on. There's something called life cycles. And cycles and life cycle states are the actual state of any of architectural assets at any particular moment in time. And as an example of this, you actually understand what this means. We've got components and versions. So these are configurations or versions of our architecture, again at a particular moment in time. And then in the previous slide, I mentioned about change and the difference between change from an architecture or a corporate strategy perspective versus software configuration. When we talk about components and versions inside architecture, we're not talking about software level components, and we're not talking about versions of software components. This is about configurations of information inside plateaus, and they usually represent a moment in time. And the other thing that's important here, obviously, costs. So it is cost driven. So we look at costs within the context of road mapping. Other things cost us over time. So in the presentation, we'll have moved through most of these concepts in some detail. Now, as to the concepts, there are a set of important capabilities. So the things that you would expect tooling to provide. Or if you haven't got these, are certainly the types of things you'd expect to be able to do if you're using things like PowerPoint and Visio. You need to be able to compare things, so you need to look at the difference between one plan and another, or one workspace and another. So what's between things between my as-is architecture and my target architecture. We want to look at heat maps, and we want to be able to color code things and change of things depending on their state. We're in versions of the architecture, so to version things off and change the versions. We also want to look at audits, so what changed, who changed it, when did they change it, so rollback changes or look at future work. And a big area here is looking at impact assessment. So what is the impact of changing something in a future version of our architecture? These are important capabilities. Okay, so a big thing that drives the change is business motivation. And both in TOGAF and ArchiMate, there are strong business motivation models and business motivation extensions. Drive through the need change. They also drive requirements. The requirements are driven out from our change initiatives. Often we can map those into things like a formal requirements management system. So if you remember on a previous slide, we looked at the TOGAF ADM, and at that we had requirements. The requirements are change initiatives. And motivation is driving those requirements. And formally manage them inside things like Excel spreadsheets. It's very difficult. So quite often with large requirements exercises, you can use a requirements management system. So what we need to do is, when we look at change and implementing requirements, we need to start looking at how we implement these in work packages, so units of work. So change initiatives need to be designed and entered as part of work packages. And packages, again, are available both inside TOGAF and in ArchiMate. Those concepts already exist, those standards. So roadmaps. So roadmaps are the actual or the anticipated change that's required to the architecture over a period of time. Okay, and it's that simple. And it could be, the roadmap could be a snapshot of the architecture itself, or they could be concepts within the architecture, so things like application components, or business processes, or a technology roadmap. These are all types of roadmap. Okay, so as I mentioned, both ARC and TOGAF support business motivation modelling. Are different to each other, but they both support them. It has support for requirements management and managing workspaces, plateaus. ArchiMate and TOGAF support work packages, gaps and requirements, so they're available inside both meta models. So if we quick look at the TOGAF meta model, so this is a level meta model, it's not the detailed meta model from TOGAF. You'll stop here, there are also support for requirements, gaps and work packages, and these are associated with all objects in scope of our work package. It could be an organizational unit, it could be a business service, it could be a mixture of both, or processes or functions, or what else we're changing. If you look at the orange boxes on the screen here, then you can see here we put an ArchiMate meta model in here to show you how things. So it has the concept of a work package. TOGAF does. The work package can realise deliverables. Deliverables can be real plateaus, which are contained workspaces, and is associated with gaps. Now you can see at the top there, the green boxes, is that we've also now extended, and this is also extending ArchiMate, and to support the concept of milestones. So have a work package can use milestones, work package milestones, and plateaus use workspaces. And that's pretty important, because that then allows us to define and deliver road mapping. Okay, so a little bit about what an architecture workspace is. Some important concepts inside here. So workspace is really analogous to a plateau. So workspace is a container of artifacts for our enterprise architecture. It's self-contained. It can spread across multiple models and views and different domains. So if you remember when I mentioned before that a workspace plateau, it could be for our current architecture, it could be for target architecture for 2015. That contained container can contain into the business architecture, IT architecture, anything else within an architecture. It's not used for splitting up our architectural assets into business versus technology. They're contained. And what we do, we isolate the workspace for working within a project. Essentially, it might be a target change program. It might be an application portfolio management program we're undertaking. We can workspace, so it's the same way that you can, if you're using technology like VMware, where you baseline and snapshot an image and move forward, the same concept can be applied to a /workspace. So here's architecture. You line that and move on to a target architecture and keep a business snapshot of your workspace. And then changes, gaps between those plateaus, you can track which requests and tasks and where you're changing things. So underpinning anything to do with road mapping, the concept of a plateau works is crucially important. Now, if you haven't looked at ArchiMate, it's worth looking at, because it comes with a set of extensions called implementation and migration, specific views, and those views lets us look at platters, deliverables, and work packages. Now, that's useful because that now to start looking at how we model and target workspaces. Okay, looking at a view on here of an implementation and migration diagram. It may be very easy to see, but this is on there represent each plateau. And in those plateaus, we have gaps. And then we also have deliverables and work packages. And that's a really good idea. It's a really good idea to start mapping out your application and migration strategy, i.e., what are your as-is and target plateaus and workspaces. They help you then drive through things like roadmaps. Because plateaus represent how you expect the architecture to look at a moment in time. And it's based on time. And we'll see how it comes together in a moment. Okay, so what is a work package? So work package is a discrete piece of work with a start and end time. So you start a work package at a moment in time and you end it at a moment in time. We work packages at various levels. So they could be very small tasks of work or units of behavior. They could be projects, whatever you define a project as. They could be high-level programs of work. Anything that you have or deliver that has start and end time. Each of themselves have milestones. And the milestones show the different gates that you move through in order to produce deliverables. You have 1, 2, 5, as many milestones as you like for a work package. Okay. We then call a timeline. Timeline is something, again, not ArchiMate, part of TOGAF at the moment, but timeline will represent your work package at any given moment in time. And we're a way of showing the view of what a timeline looks like. And we represent the milestones as pies along the axis. I'll show you what this looks like in a second. But let me show you pies on the axis horizontally. And inside the pies, start to show what we call domain values. So if I show these on the screen. So a program timeline. So the horizontal, looking at on the screen, are work packages. So you'll see a box around the work package showing what a work package is. Bottom of the screen here is a timeline. So going from 2011 to 2015. And what we're showing here are the different milestones and at which date they occur. And tools, tooling and other tooling, then this is just a model view. So this view is built from the underlying data inside our repository. So the view is generated automatically. You could do by hand if you want to as well. Important concept here is these are work packages, the works of milestones, and think about the work package. The work package connects into the architecture. Actually, an architectural view of your time and what you're delivering over time. And this is one type of roadmap. Okay, so firstly, I mentioned costs before. So work packages, deliverables associated with costs. We've implemented this as budgeted costs and actual costs. And obviously, if you're really interested in costing, then you can either import in from things like Excel. I'm trying to give you a tool demonstration here, so this is purely, I'm taking you through some of the concepts here. But you could use a portfolio management environment, which has things like costs and net present value and various other aspects to costs. but those are not associated with work packages. So I mentioned before that we're core interest in strategic planning and enterprise architecture, and having a look at how enterprise architecture overlaps with program management. This is one of the areas of overlap. You can take work packages and deliverables and roadmaps and costs, and then just have a very sensible conversation with the people that own the budgets and the money in the organisation. Quite often they're in the program management office. Okay, so look at life cycles. So cycles allow us to look at our models, but specific viewpoints of time. And life states show us how individual artifacts within our architecture move through a lifespan or a life cycle. So what we found with most of our customers is that there are two sets of life cycles. There are what we call deployment life cycles and use life cycles. Now, deployment cycles really relate to how you're deploying a particular asset or artifact. Often these are physical, but quite you're interested in things like if you're looking at an application or an application component, when are you going to introduce it? When are you going to do the requirements for it? When are you going to its usage rolled out? When are you going to sunset it? And when are you going to get out of the business? You can use deployment life cycles for many objects inside TOGAF and ArchiMate. It could be a business process you're rolling out. It could be an application component, a technology component, a business capability. There's usage, which is more akin to and aligned to the business. So usage life cycles are things like when you need to train the users up in the use of this object. When are you going to look at it in terms of availability? So you have budget as a business, although it's being rolled out by IT to actually get on board. So the two sets of different types of life cycles and two different types of stakeholder that are in those life cycles. Now, life cycles into the milestones, which we're looking at in work packages. Now, I'll explain why in a second. So what we've done is we've extended the TOGAF meta model here. Include, as I mentioned before, the work package can have a work package milestone, cycles associated with milestones, and a life status for a life cycle. And there's a subset of the TOGAF meta model here, but a life cycle can be associated with a technology component or an application component. Okay, and many other things. So here are some examples. So for deployment life cycles, we've got birth, plan, implementation, production, and retired. You can change these and modify these as suits. One thing is, we found yet a standard way of representing deployment life cycles that's standardized by the industry. So we've come up with a common set that we found with our clients that work. There are cycle states in things like application portfolio management, in oil, and other endeavors. The ones we've got for deployment object. For usage life cycles, the training of the usage, making it available, decommissioning it, and finally sunsetting it. And we'll look at these inside an app component. I'm showing you here IBM Rational System Architect is a tool we're looking at here with ArchiMate and TOGAF. So we're looking at an application components here, and the red box at the top there is you life cycles, so deploy cycles, on the left of a column, and at the bottom we're showing you usage life cycles. This gets interesting now. So now we start to tie life cycles to particular application components. Okay, with those, we can also associate things like dates with them. Okay, so each life cycle has a date. So, for example, if we look at this Salesforce.com on here, then we've got a birth, implement, plan, product, hired. Each of those life cycles will have a date associated with it of when it started and when it ends. You'll see this is life cycle as well as so life cycles, they also have dates as well. And what we can do is start to look at heat mapping. And start to look at bringing in and sensing our architecture based on dates. So with different colours for the different, for example, for the different life cycle states for 2014. That would view. If I did the same heat map again for 2015, I made a completely different set of colours. Now, you can use shapes. Again, heat mapping in the tooling, you can certainly change shapes, you can change depictions. So you have, if you suffer from kindness or you suffer from any disability for 101, know it as well. Okay. So what I'll talk about now are some example workspace patterns. Okay, to plateaus. And then what we'll try is bring everything back together again so it ties together. So what we're looking at here is a set of workspace patterns. These are generally how our customers work as they move through their enterprise architecture life cycle. So the enterprise architecture doesn't tend just to be a project, complete cycle itself. So one of the things we're doing here, if we look at the first bubble on here, which is called E version 1.2, that in the middle there is our baseline architecture. We could decide that we're going to go off the top here and create two different plateaus, X and Y. So that would be as is and a D. We could look at this for the reasons of doing a compliance program. Be various drivers that drive us off to actually take the base architecture and break it into two pieces. We could decide that Y is the we're interested in, so we can promote that to be E version 1.3, the next big bubble. And then for E version 1.3, we've got an outsourcing initiative at the top. So decide to create workspace A, workspace B, and break into B2 and B1. So that gives us three alternatives, A, B2, and B1. So what to do with those? We may implement those, we go off and do something with those. At the same time, we may be doing a refresh of our blueprint, our architecture, so we may be collecting some feedback for organisation. So we create D as a workspace, we populate that, and then baseline to EA version 2. And so on, we may acquire or merge into the organisation, so existing companies or technologies and create Y. So that's an idea of the eating of a plateau over time. And the reason why using an implementation and migration view inside ArchiMate is really important, because we want to be able to map all of these plateaus between them and the reason why you've broken them off to create them. Again, I'd like to see the detail of these slides. You can get the slides from us, and they've got far more detail on them. An example here, a very quick example, is as versus 2B. So taking version 1.3 on here as is architecture, and we create as 2B alternative X, Y 2B alternative Y, and with some analysis and decide that we get far more revenue return on Y, and therefore create version 1.4. Okay, so those are just different examples of workspaces and why plateaus are important. Now, when we look at roadmaps and looked at the timelines, it can be inside each one of those plateaus. So we can have roadmaps of time of how we expect things to appear over time inside each workspace / plateau. We can compare against each other, and we make different views depending on which workspace we're looking at. This can get quite complicated in terms of slice and dice the information. Starting off with a workspace structure, a plateau structure, you'll get where you want to get to. Okay, let me just recap on slide this timeline does for us. So it gives us milestones, those that represent a date, segments, so the segments of the pie can be tied to business issues, like it could be one segment for green for cost, for high cost, low cost, IT alignment, strategic intent, that type of thing. The horizontal bar represents a package over time. We can costs into here. We talked about gaps and plateaus and how they tied together, and that is an implementation and migration viewpoint. We tie the plateaus to work packages, which in turn milestones. So everything connected. Okay. Now another type of roadmap that's heavily used, and again using the IBM Rational System Architect tool here again. So this is a tool that we resell. You can use on our cloud on a monthly basis, and this is mapping. Time we're giving a consolidated view again by TOGAF of a roadmap. So let's look at the top of the screen here. So the first thing we're looking at here is this is based on an organizational unit. For example here, it's called account management. So we have a description of what account management is. At the bottom here, we've got the related business services, the left-hand corner. So these are services directly from its meta model that the org unit. The mid right at the bottom, called milestones to the org unit. I'll in a second. We're storing things like risks and issues in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, interestingly, the roadmap here is generated for application components. So the timeline that you're seeing in the middle of the presentation here is a set of applications. Okay, so application components. Move through, you're seeing blocks of date: 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. And what's being cut in there are life cycles over time. So the cycle states we talked about: birth, planning, implementing, production, retired. See the states overlaid on top of as we move for each application component. So what we're doing here, and you can do this in any tool at all. You can do this just by creating an Excel spreadsheet. So in fact, a lot of our customers use spreadsheets directly to do this type of thing. But this now is showing you how this relates back to the Toyota model. Okay, so I'll skip over that slide. Okay, so let me just talk through some lessons learned, and then we'll open up some questions. So, an aspect here is to start looking at how you map out a repository strategy. So, we've talked about plateaus, spaces. We've talked about hate to each other. So, it's a really good idea to start working out the repository strategy and how you intend to represent your plateaus, and use type of diagram view and represent those workspaces. So I recommend using an implementation migration view in ArchiMate. Your common set of terms, cycle states. So you need to understand what does the organization mean by sunset or deprecate. What terms do they use in terms of cycle states? So set those up and communicate them to the organization. You can add time to most enterprise architecture concepts concepts. So out of the box, if you look at TOGAF and ArchiMate, they handle the time well, or the temporal dates very well. So locking those in. So you can say when a business, for example, comes into service or out of service. You say when an application component is in service or out of service. Look at how enterprise architecture fits in with portfolio management. This is a good place for you to start, from an architecture perspective, discussions with the program management team about how you share costs, work packages, tasks, and the reps, and they'll soon start to see the value of enterprise architecture within portfolio management. And then, you need to make sure that you're talking in language that non-architects can understand, and that's your PowerPoint and Excel, which is why we put an Excel roadmap at the end there. One of the key things is that obviously there is a plethora of Excel roadmaps in the organisation that are based upon some semblance of truth, which is the underlying meta model for TOGAF or ArchiMate. So those are some of the lessons we've learned from working with customers and how we've laid out road mapping. So I know a lot of ground here. The recording will be made available. There's a lot of information on our website that can help you in white papers. There's boxes. Say on the cloud with this stuff. We've got downloads, and there's also blogs if you want to have some comments about this. So I realise there's lots of technical depth in here, and some people might have liked it at a higher level. Some people wanted more depth. Feel free to reach out to us. On that point, Simon, back to you, and we can open it up for questions.
That's great, Martin. Many thanks for that. So just to reiterate, the best way for the attendees to get hold of your slides is to do what, Martin?
Yeah. You email marketing@corso3.com.
That's fine. And if anyone has any problems that way, then everyone will have a copy of my email address. I'm more than happy to act as a go-between and assist with that process. So please feel free to send me an email as well. So yes, we have some questions in the QA, so I'm just going to work my way through the QA. The first question from Rick. He's asking, what would an example be of the demand values which are presented in the PI elements on a timeline view?
Oh, okay. So those tend to change depending on what you're doing. But an example might be, is there enough resource for this milestone? So you could colour it red, amber, green, depending on whether there's high resource needed, medium resource needed, low resource needed, or it could be risk. So at this moment in time, at this milestone, is it high, medium, or low risk? So those types of things where you really want feedback on the milestone.
Okay, a question here from Lynette, just asking the diagram that had the workspaces with the milestones. She's asking, was that something that could be produced in ArchiMate?
No, it's not part of ArchiMate. So the interesting thing is, I don't flick back, I'm just hoping that it's the right side. I'm just on here. Okay, it's not part of ArchiMate because ArchiMate doesn't support milestones and therefore you can't generate it. So we've then Corso extended in Arching and TOGAF to support milestones and therefore produce this view. Now this isn't a view that we've invented, by the way. Also, we took this from DODAF and MODAF, which is the Department of Defence Architectural Framework and the Military Defence Architectural Framework in the UK. So those views already exist. We've just repurposed them to provide on top of ArchiMate and TOGAF. So people can do it themselves as well.
Okay, a follow-on question about that same subject from Michael. Saying the roadmap PI's milestones always have three portions with different colours. What do the portions and colours represent?
That was very similar to question to earlier on. So in our examples here, they've got three. You can have as many as you like, as many segments to the PI. But they represent resource, in our example, resource, cost, and impact to the business.
Great, thank you. Question from Jano. Regarding the TOGAF meta model, can a technology component trigger a life cycle change? If yes, how does that impact the workspaces?
Okay, so that's a detailed question. So the answer is yes. So you can model that. You can model it inside a workspace, and then just use compare to look at the difference between two workspaces. So it's really a textual question. That's part of modeling and building an architecture. Quite one offline actually, and go through detail with the questioner.
Absolutely, and just I mean that's an important point. If we don't manage to get through to any questions, please hesitate to once again either send an email through to Martin or myself, and we can take those questions and deal with offline. Next question: is there a way to connect project plans from Microsoft Project to update some sort of status in the architecture state view?
That's a good question. So fit there. We haven't done that. So we haven't put any. From a technology point of view, we haven't provided any capabilities to do that. We're thinking about for the future. It's not something that we've worked with our customers on, but it's certainly a natural fit to start looking at milestones, work patterns, and how they fit with projects. We've certainly from a different perspective, which is not MS Project, but looking at putting it into portfolio management tools like Focal Points and Clarity from CA.
Okay, and here from Rick, he's asking, how do you manage dependencies between workspaces?
Okay, so we do that through baselining. And this is a tool-specific question here because you bought System Architect as the tool from IBM Rational. That has the capability to create workspaces off baselines, and you can create multiple parallel workspaces off a baseline, and the tool will understand what's changed by tracing back through its tree, through its roots. So that's the way you manage dependencies at the root level. Okay,
thank you. And here from Neil, how are you handling the temporal aspects of the model? Are cycle states attributes of each of the individual objects, or objects in their own right?
So they're objects in their own right. So a life cycle is an object in its own right, and you can reuse that and map it to any object in the model. An example earlier on, which I'll go back to. So this example, so a life cycle is an object in its own right. It can map to any object in the repository. I've shown two on here. One is technology component, one application component, but they are objects in their own right. The life cycle itself has a start and end time with it, so it is a temporal definition. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, thank you. Working my way through the questions. Here from Robert, it says, from my experience, what is the best way to prevent architectural discussions going from IBM to SAP or SAP to TIBCO?
So I don't quite understand that one.
Yeah.
Do you want to read that one once more, and I'll see if I can. Okay.
He said, what is the best way to prevent architectural discussions going from IBM to SAP or SAP to TIBCO?
Okay, I want to take offline then because I don't quite understand the context. So.
Yeah, but just if you send them itself or Martin an email, I'm sure we can handle that one offline.
Yeah, we'll sort it out.
A question from JC: have you modelled concepts relating to technical debt in your roadmaps?
We say no, but it's yeah. So yeah, we should. That's a good idea. So technical debt actually is something that we're seeing a lot more customers talk about now. So it's another thing to start looking at in terms of the roadmap. So far we've concentrated on risk, but not technical debt.
Okay. Adriano, do you have any scenarios about business risk management representation by using ArchiMate?
Yeah, we do have some actually around risk. So that's something. If you reach out to me, then I'll send you some details about that. So not a problem.
From Sadie's, in the roadmap example, is business services the same as capabilities?
Oh, that's a really good question and a deep question. So, in that it's not. So that they're different. So, business capability is really a capability of the business, and a business service is really a wrapped outward view of what the organization delivers. So we're very different things, but different.
Okay. Question from Siren. How do you address the needs of scalability when you have a team of architects of approximately 200 people who need to share concepts between different workspaces and releases? For example, an application component created in EA version 1 is simultaneously used in EA version 1.1.
Yep. So that's definitely a reason why you need to do why you plateaus and workspaces. So back to the idea that you need to baseline and subtrees your architecture, and you really plan out, especially 100 architects, you need to thoroughly plan out how you're using the architecture. And it's not something that's uncommon either. So we've been doing a lot of work with IBM and on their own internal enterprise architecture, and you can download the case study from the Corso website. But on that, they have many, many more architects than that, all sharing workspaces, baselines, locales in different countries. But you do need very good release structure, and you're mapping it out up front rather than after the fact.
Okay, Martin. A question here from Bob asking about activity in the open group. So I don't know if you'll be able to help, but I'll ask you anyway.
Okay.
How far along in your discussions with the open group are you, and when can you expect to see road mapping artifacts in TOGAF/ArchiMate?
So we're very early. I can answer that. Yes, we're very early on in that. So the comfort at the open group working on TOGAF.next, which is really aligning the ArchiMate visuals with TOGAF. So things to do with road mapping and time have not been incorporated in that version, so it's likely to be after that, which is going to be really, I would have thought, 2015.
Okay, thank you. Question here from Gordon, just asking, can you give us a little bit more information about technical debt? What is technical debt?
Okay, yeah, so debt is really about understanding, as an organisation, what you're doing in terms of on IT, therefore what the technical debt is to the organisation. So you understand what they're costing you, not just of money, but in terms of the way that they're embedded within the company, within the organisation. So that's really the technical debt. It's the heritage or the legacy that you've got. And obviously, doing road mapping, it's a good idea to start looking at that as well, because that affects what you can and what you can't do.
Good. Well, we've come down to the end of the list on the QA. So just one final question here from Mank. Can this be used to show the data network architecture? It goes on where data originates, is consumed, modified, provided. And he says, note, not system perspective, but as data flows, information factory. Go on that one, Martin?
Yep. Yeah. So both ArchiMate and TOGAF give us the ability to actually understand that. But there are other techniques as well, and we do support them as well for things like looking at data flows and processes, which may be more applicable, but they can all be certainly used with road mapping as well, because you're talking about data. You can assign time to data, you can assign time to processes that process data. Again, a big topic, and I'm quite happy to take that one offline as well.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the questions, Martin. So I think this will probably be a convenient moment just to bring today's session to an end. Do you have any further things to say just to close up, Martin?
Yeah, I've just left on there the website address, so you can reach out to us if you want. We're happy for you to interact with us. So if anybody's got any further questions, anything they think of, anything they didn't understand, just reach out to us.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank you, Martin, for your time today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and please do look out on the Open Group website for future. But at this point, I think I'm going to close the event. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Cheers.